Thank you very much, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am very honored to have been invited to this seminar. I think this type of event is really relevant in the context of the preparation of COP21, because it is of tremendous importance of increasing our understanding of climate and energy policies. And I try to provide you with some analytical elements that were produced in research projects or in actions in the definition of public policies in France, to try to show you first why deep decarbonization of energy systems is necessary. Second, I try to illustrate how deep decarbonization is feasible, and is feasible through diversified pathways, according to the countries, but even for one country, and I take some examples from the French case, for one country you can also identify different ways to decarbonize the energy system. And finally, I'll try to illustrate that the fact that decarbonization may bring strong co-benefits and indeed opportunities, positive opportunities for sustainable development. So first, why is decarbonization of energy system necessary? This is taken directly from the last IPCC report. This illustrates the connection between the cumulative anthropogenic CO2 emissions introduced in the atmosphere and the expected temperature increase in the long run. And you see, we are here. That is, we have already introduced, if you look at the top scale, this is in CO2, we have already introduced about 1,500 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we already have an increase of about 1 degree compared to the pre-industrial situation. This has already been mentioned. The target for the international community is to limit the increase in temperature to 2 degrees. And this gives us a carbon budget for the rest of the century. As you can see here, if we want to keep below 2 degrees, we have to keep the total CO2 injected in the atmosphere below 3,000, and even less if we want to increase the probability of meeting the target. So this shows what is the carbon budget for the world in the 21st century. About 100 and 500, but probably better, 1,000 gigatons of CO2 for the rest of the century. Second point, there is a clear gap between the plausible scenarios and the sustainable trajectories. And this is illustrated very well, in my view, by the recent shell scenarios, the so-called mountains and the ocean scenarios, where they show the difference between the exploratory scenarios, which are to some extent business as usual, or even policy as usual scenarios, and the normative scenarios, which are scenarios with much lower emission profiles. And you see that in between there is a gap. And this gap is really the problem we have to address, and we have to define very quickly the solution to reduce this gap between what is plausible if we do nothing and what is sustainable if we introduce the right policies. From the Stern report, I took this estimate of the cost of the different scenarios. The plausible scenario without policies introduce 4 degrees temperature increase, the risk of very strong climate feedbacks, high uncertainties, and high cost, the cost of climate change, about 5 to 20% of global world product. You see there is uncertainty, but this is not, the uncertainty is not a reason not to take into account this assessment. And the normative scenarios may allow to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees with reduced uncertainty and lower cost, about 1 to 5%, a mix of abatement and remaining adaptation cost. Last slide on this part of the presentation, the cost of delayed action. This material is taken from another source. This is taken from the Ampere FP7 project. This was a collaborative project by different teams of modelers at European level, and it allowed to show what has already been mentioned. Delayed action is much more costly than early action. This means that we cannot wait either to reduce uncertainty or or wait for more technological progress. We have to act now. If not, we will have to have a much stronger action very soon by 2030, and then more stringent emission pathways in the very long term. So it's better to act early than to delay action. Then let's come to how to define deep decarbonization in different conditions in different countries, and how to show that decarbonization is feasible through diversified pathways. And here I will take some elements from the French experience we had in the year 2013, because the law on energy transition for green growth, which is currently debated in the French Parliament, has been prepared by some kind of what I would call a deliberative process with a coordination committee, a national council of the energy transition with 7 times 16 members, that is more than 100 people involved in the discussions, from NGOs, consumer associations, trade union, business, etc., a citizen and industry group, and finally a group of 45 experts in charge of producing relevant materials and scientifically verified elements for the discussion. And I participated in this expert group for the part on scenarios. And our work on scenarios has developed in the following way. In terms of energy and climate policy, we can continue in the business as usual. But as I have already, I hope to have demonstrated that this is not an option. We have to go to the transition. And for France, the transition means basically to reduce greenhouse gas emission by a factor of 4 in 2050 compared to 1990. This is a transition. This is the main goal. This is a new normal to some extent for French energy policy. Then you have different options. You can have a very strong action on demand, reduction of 50% of energy demand in 2050 compared to today, tremendously challenging target, or you can have a relatively lower action on demand, reducing only by 20%. This is already quite a result. Then you have the choice of your fuel mix, and you can have different options. And here I can illustrate four options on the total. You can have scenarios with a priority to renewable energies, and in that case, by the way, this is a scenario with a phase-out of nuclear energy, which in the case of France is really leaving the usual energy system. You can have low demand with diversification of sources. You can have also different options of diversification, and finally, on the right part here, yes, here you have the old energy model, the old French energy model, I would say, with a very important share of nuclear. And we try to regroup the different scenarios that were existing pre-existing in the debate, and try to turn the jungle of scenarios into a more organized, more well-organized system. And finally, we came out with 4 options. The first one is called sobriety, so it is strong energy demand reduction, strong renewable, and low and zero nuclear. This is strong energy efficiency with a limited share of nuclear, about 25%. This is relatively higher demand, but still efficient, but with more nuclear, and this is the model. You can illustrate that in the following way. you have the sobriety scenario here, 15% reduction of energy demand, 90% renewable in the electricity mix, and zero nuclear. The efficiency scenario, the diversity scenario, and the decarbonization scenarios. As you can see, the share of nuclear in that case is, in the case of France, is a really differentiating factor in the different scenarios. And to my understanding, the future French energy policy will probably be a mix of the efficiency scenario here, this scenario, which is to some extent the first best scenario as it appears in the law on the energy transition, and there will probably be in the future, and I fully agree on the fact that the future cannot be determined 100% today. We have to develop a dynamic management process of energy transition and be able to adapt to innovations, new constraints, crises, shocks, and so on. And I imagine that the future of the energy system in France will be a dynamic mix of the first best solution and maybe second best solution, but more realistic. This is a more general dimension, but well, this is how we can identify the future French energy policy. I would like to give some example of a second research project, which is strongly connected with Paris COP21 negotiation, because this project was initiated by Laurence Tubiana, who is now the French embassy on climate of the French presidency, and also by Jeffrey Sachs, who is an advisor, economic advisor to Ban Ki-moon. And they developed about 1 year ago, a little bit more, the idea of promoting a project of designing deep decarbonization pathways for the key emitters. So this is a deep decarbonization pathway project. It regroups 31 leading research institutions from 15 countries, which covers more or less 75% of global CO2 emissions. The goal is to prepare transparent national deep decarbonization pathways, support positive outcome for the UNFCCC international climate negotiations, and build an ongoing and extending global network. What is interesting in this project is the fact that these are national teams that are producing scenarios that are taking into account the national peculiarities in energy problems. The country, this is a list of the country, all the major emitters are here. And this is a description of the common understanding of what the decarbonization is. First, energy efficiency. This is a common knowledge of all the teams working in this project. And this was proposed by Jim Williams, who is the decarbonization advisor of the governor of California, in a paper in Science, which is a very, very interesting paper. First, energy efficiency. Second, the decarbonization of electricity generation. This is a very important issue. We are all convinced that electricity will play a key role in the decarbonization of energy systems, because electricity can take advantage of many low-carbon energy resources and deliver a decarbonized energy carrier to final consumer. And finally, third element, the electrification of users, and particularly the development of electric vehicles. These are the three pillars, hierarchically organized, I would say. This is first, energy efficiency, second, decarbonization of electricity, and third, electrification. If you do electrification without having decarbonized and using coal to produce electricity, this is not a solution, of course. And this is simply an illustration of the diversity in national solutions in the case of the power sector. I do not elaborate on that, but you can see that there are very diversified patterns of electricity mix in the different countries. And I come to the third point, which is my conclusion. The decarbonization of energy systems will, first, it will necessitate strong enabling conditions. First, of course, changes in technologies, behaviors, and institutions. This is not or, this is and. technologies and behaviors and institutions. The ability to manage high shares of variable renewable electricity in reliable electricity grids, this is a key issue in my view. Supergrids, smart grids, storage, maybe power-to-gas solution are a key elements in the decarbonization. Necessity of price signal, probably to have some kind of carbon tax and also a stabilization of the emission trading systems. Availability of adequate financing, corresponding employment policies with professional transition, local energy policies, and stabilized national, European, and international framework. All these elements are very consistent with what has been presented from the new climate economy report. And finally, this will bring strong co-benefits and opportunities. A transition based on the decarbonization of energy systems will bring strong environmental co-benefits. We have already taken into account or presented the local air pollution advantages. It will also reduce the foreign trade deficits associated to energy imports. This is not a minor issue, and it will reduce the corresponding economic and geopolitical risks. And beyond these significant co-benefits, the energy transition is also a major opportunity for green growth through more investment, both from the public and the private sector. It will create new jobs, and to some extent it will substitute new jobs to imported natural capital in the form of gas, oil or coal. And it is also, of course, a major area for industrial innovation. This is what has already been mentioned. So these are many reasons, in my view, that can illustrate the fact that decarbonization is a core element for a green growth in Europe. Thank you for your attention. And these are three references.